My son and daughter-in-law left me in the shadows for years, until a big magazine put my name in print, and suddenly everyone wanted to sit at my table. The message came as the glossy spread landed on my kitchen counter, a weight of paper and possibility I hadn't expected. The magazine photo showed one of my walls, white, sunlight, a row of clay bowls on a shelf, and beneath it, in a tidy line, my name and a number. The number felt like a verdict. 12 million, the article said, a valuation of the gallery. People will read that and think I'm rich, I told myself, and I laughed at the sound of it. It was a small laugh, a short, surprised thing that startled the birds in the jacaranda outside. If you want to know how this ends, hit subscribe and stay with me. 12 hours after that cover hit my mailbox, Viviana sent a WhatsApp. "Mom, can we talk? Dinner tonight?" Her message was polite, but the timing was not. For 4 years I had been living with a gap where my family used to be. 4 years of silence like a closed door. 4 years of blocked numbers and unopened bouquets of excuses. 4 years is exact, 1,460 days. I count them sometimes, because numbers are stubborn. They keep the math of absence honest. They remind me that grief is not a moment, but a ledger, entries listed one by one. People often ask me, when they hear the story, how a woman in her 60s survives being cut loose by her own son. They expect a single shattering event and then some tidy resurrection. It's messier than that. It's not a moment of divine revelation. It's a series of tiny, stubborn choices that add up to a life rebuilt. The day they pushed me out is frozen in my mind like a photograph. It was the sort of afternoon that sits hot and sharp in the throat. The apartment smelled faintly of bergamot, and the coffee had gone cold. Damian had a look I knew well. It was the one he wore when he needed to be kinder than he felt. Viviana sat too straight, like a woman who had rehearsed the exact tilt of her chin. "You can't keep this land," Viviana said, as though the sentence were a button to be pressed and the room would behave. "We need the money." She said practical as if it were an adjective that explained everything. My husband Roberto had left that small parcel outside the city in a quitclaim only to my name. He had whispered years earlier that some things ought to be kept by hand and heart, where their worth wasn't counted by peso signs. He trusted me with that trust. He thought I would know what to do with memory. Damian didn't fight. He never did fight when the pressing felt softer than the guilt. He said, "Mama, we're just trying to help. Think of the children." I thought of Lucia then, nearly a child herself, and Emilio with his shy hands. I thought of them, and I opened my mouth, and the words that came were softer than I felt. "If you take it, you take what Roberto trusted me with." That was not a bargain. It was a fact. They told me plainly that I was being stubborn. They told me I didn't understand. They told me that my way of holding on to the past would ruin their plans. Viviana folded her hands on the tablecloth, an expensive linen I could not name, and smiled like someone offering a final courtesy. Then telephonos went dark. At first I thought it was temporary. Perhaps it would be like the evenings we all had together, where things smoothed over before dessert. The messages stopped. Calls didn't go through. Photos on my phone became relics. A wedding plate, a small boy asleep with a crayon under his chin, Roberto in the doorway of a house that smelled of paint. After the blocking, the silence was like a slow leak. I made coffee for one. I washed the same dishes. My neighbors looked at me with a tentative pity that made my skin crawl. I remember standing in front of my old wardrobe, running my hands over dresses I hadn't worn since Roberto died, and thinking that grief had a layering quality, the immediate grief for the man I loved, and a second grief for being erased. Grief does strange practical things. It can make you sleep too much or not at all. It can make the days indistinguishable from a shadow. For a year, I let myself be small. I rented a television and watched shows where nothing in the script required me to make a decision. People visited, Doña Crescencia from the neighborhood, and Yolanda Martinez, who ran the market stall, and they brought empanadas and gossip, which is a kind of medicine. They noticed when I started to stitch again. Dora Medina, who makes the best mole in Coyoacán, would come by and sit at my table and tell me stories of women who had started over with nothing but a pot and a will. The discovery of the deed, the turn that would take me out of the shadows, came by accident. I was cleaning a drawer where Roberto kept his tools and receipts, a drawer full of rubber bands, old screws, and a small tin of yellowed stamps. The deed slid beneath a stack of chess magazines. It was on legal paper, folded so many times it fit in a palm like a secret. The name on it was mine. The property in San Miguel de Allende did not look like much on paper. A narrow commercial space, a dusty long room with a back courtyard, and a small sagging mezzanine. I remember my first time there, the heat of the cobblestones under my shoes, the air redolent of wood smoke, and the perfume of a woman selling candles at the corner. The building's paint was peeling. Rattling from a neighbor's radio filled the square. But I stood on that threshold and felt something like possibility, the kind of possibility you feel when you put your hand to a piano and hear the first note. Miranda Suarez was a young architect I met at a small fair in Coyoacan, someone I later called an ally without being able to put the correct word on it. She came with a sketchbook and an excited energy that made the dust settle differently.
"We could open the wall here," she said, drawing in the margin as though the plaster understood her. "You have a courtyard for light. Imagine ceramics on a shelf and textiles against that white." Her hands were quick, her tenderness practical. I had some savings, small, careful things Roberto and I had set aside, and a stubborn refusal to consider myself finished. We signed the lease, and then the real work began. There was scraping of paint, and long hours bargaining for tiles with a man who insisted they were authentic. I learned to hang lights, and to measure a space so that the eye rested where the light made things sing. We painted the walls white, not because white is fashionable, but because white makes color honest. We hung mirrors, laid out textiles, and found a local carpenter who could make a shelf that would cradle the bowls without making them seem fragile. The early days were honest and small. My first sale felt like a miracle. An old woman from Guanajuato bought a painted plate for 8,000 pesos. She wrapped it in paper with such care that I realized artists and buyers share a tenderness. It wasn't the number on the receipt that mattered so much as the way her face lit when she touched the glaze. Social media was a new language. Miranda taught me how to post a photo, how to breathe into the caption. I learned to lean into the things I loved, the rough edges of a clay cup, the story of a woman who dyes her thread with cochineal, the way light moves on a hand-thrown bottle. I learned to tell those small stories in sentences that fit into square spaces, and slowly people came. First tourists, then a local magazine that wrote a paragraph, then an influencer who took a photograph of a macrame hanging and tagged us. I went from selling 2 pieces a week to a steady trickle that let me pay rent and the apprentices I hired to help with packing. We called the gallery Raíces Artesanales because roots feel like a claim and a promise at the same time. The name is not a boast. It is a statement of method, to connect the maker to the buyer and to give old techniques a room to breathe. The space became more than a business for me. It became a workshop for memory. I held workshops for older women. Doña Crescencia taught us how to embroider. Dora talked about sauces and stories for half a day, and then started a stall where she sold jars of mole to tourists who thought anything bottled with tradition was a bargain. We displayed work from women who had no gallery access and paid them fairly. We kept the prices honest because dignity does not negotiate with hunger. The gallery changed me in ways the silence could not. I woke earlier. I had noise, hammers in the morning, the chatter of apprentices, the smell of coffee brewing under a tin roof. When Lucia came to visit with a school friend, she would sit near the back, watching the way hands shaped clay, and I could feel the faintest of bridges being built, the kind that form when a grandmother and granddaughter share space without being tasked with apology. By the time the magazine came calling, Raíces had been open for 3 years. The feature was long, crisp, and smelled of editorial care. A reporter had spent an afternoon with me, asking about Roberto, about the first awkward sales, about the women who taught me how to repair a broken bowl without pretending the crack was anything but a crack. She wrote about the gallery's role in the local circuit, and this is the part that surprised me. She put a figure to the brand. The article estimated a valuation, 12 million. I kept saying it under my breath, tasting it like a foreign coin. When you have lived in a house where poverty is familiar, the idea of a number like that does odd things to your body. It is not greed exactly. It is the loosening of a tight band around the chest. It felt practical. It felt like air. The WhatsApp that followed Viviana's message was short. Damian will be there too.
They want to clear things up." She added an emoji, a little folded hand sign that read like a question. Polite, efficient, like an invitation to a restaurant with a secret bill. I thought of the old land that Roberto had trusted me with, and I thought of all the times I had been told that memory is a luxury. When I looked at that message, I felt a heat under my ribs, not the hot burn of raw anger, but the steady, lit kind of resolve that comes from someone who has learned to earn her own mornings. I told myself I would go, not because I wanted to be reunited with them in a sentimental way, but because I had something they did not, evidence and the patience to make it speak. Patience is an underrated weapon. For a long time, I had responded to pain with the only tool I had, silence. Silence felt like survival, but survival can be passive or active. I prefer active. I had spent those years cultivating an independence built on real work. I had bought a small lockbox for documents. I had photocopies and meticulous notes. I had written the names of people who could speak for me and kept them tucked in a section of my notebook with a page marked Allies. Miranda's name was at the top. So was Arturo Mendez, an investigator I hired because he was, in his past life, an old policeman who had a patience for paper. Licenciado Fermin Capos, the lawyer, had a way of explaining legal concepts without making me feel small. Hiring Arturo was a decision made from the space between anger and prudence. He is an ex-policia with tired eyes but steady hands, the sort of man who sees the world in files and timelines. He came recommended by a woman who runs a small publishing house, who had once needed him to recover an author's royalties.
"He's discreet," she said, tapping her throat with 2 fingers, as if that gesture sealed a trust. Arturo moved with quiet efficiency. He found what he had to find. I will not list everything he uncovered, because I never want the story to become a judicial transcript. What matters is that there were inconsistencies, documents signed in ways that did not match the original, transfers whose paper tails led to empty shells rather than clear beneficiaries, messages that indicated planning where there should have been conversation. In the raw, the evidence felt like a kind of music, notes that, when played together, made a recognizable tune. It was enough to know that the past 4 years were not a simple drift, but a series of deliberate decisions. I saw Damian occasionally in those months. He would come to the gallery with a look of someone who was trying to remember how to be a father. Sometimes he would bring flowers for the shop, a clumsy apology wrapped in cellophane. I could see him watching the way people handled the art, and once he stayed late and helped me pack a damaged bowl. There are things that soften a man. Work is one of them. But I could not let affection blur the facts. The children, Lucia and Emilio, were the axis between us. They had a right to stability. I told Arturo that whatever we unearthed would not be used to punish for the sake of spectacle. It would be used to protect. That was my vow. I would pursue truth for the sake of the children, not for a moment of public shaming. The magazine's pages changed the atmosphere overnight. There were strangers who came to the gallery and left with quiet congratulations. Neighbors clapped me on the shoulder. Small collectors offered introductions. An editor called and offered to send a photographer for a follow-up. The world I had built, which had been a narrow corridor of light, widened. I started receiving emails asking if I would teach a masterclass, and an American buyer called to ask if I could ship a piece to her house in Texas. Then Viviana's invitation arrived. "I don't want a scene," she wrote in the WhatsApp thread. "Just dinner. We can talk about things." Her ellipsis felt like a weapon. I read it and felt the coolness of a place I knew too well, a room where terms are arranged to make guilt feel like a favor. I could have refused. I could have let the magazine do the talking. That used to be my plan. Stand back and watch as publicity did its work. But publicity is messy and public. I wanted control. I accepted the invitation. It was a strategic acceptance, not an emotional capitulation. I told Arturo to continue his work, and I called Fermin. The lawyer's voice was practical and calm, the sort of voice that removes the performative sorrow from things and leaves only the necessary steps. "You'll need records," he said. "You'll need witnesses. You'll need boundaries." He said boundaries like a gift.
Preparing for that evening felt like setting a stage I did not plan to star in for vanity, but as a place to hold the truth. I chose a dress that does not scream wealth, but says solidity, a navy sheath with a hint of embroidery at the cuff. It's a dress that my husband liked when he was alive, because it reminded him of the sea. I put on a small pair of earrings Roberto had given me, nothing flashy. The sound they make as I move is familiar and steady. At home in Coyoacán, the tiles are worn where my feet always find their place, and the old radio downstairs sometimes plays a bolero at odd hours. I sat on my patio the night before the dinner and watched the jacaranda drop its purple blooms like small confetti. I thought of Roberto's hands and the way he would hum when he fixed a chair leg. The grandchildren were asleep in a house down the street. Lucia will be old enough to argue with me in a few years, I told myself, and I let that imagination be a balm. The decision to attend was not about revenge. There is a small difference between revenge and measured justice. Revenge seeks to hurt. Justice seeks to restore. I had earned a new life by clay and patience. I was not going to trade it for a spectacle, but I also would not let them pretend the past 4 years were an accident. Paper is patient, and so am I. On the morning I accepted, Arturo sent a brief, copies of certain transfers, a timeline of communication, and a recording he said he recovered. He labeled things plainly. "Listen to this," he wrote. I did, and it was the sound of a plan laid out without regard to the people who would be left behind. Hearing it made the blood under my nails stiffer, which is to say, less trembling, more resolve. I told no one at the gallery that night. I walked the space alone and ran my fingers along a stack of bowls. The clay was a little chilled. In the back, Miranda had left a vase that someone had thrown with a thumbprint on the rim. I had always loved imperfections. They are honest. That evening I made a list. Not a list of grievances, but a list of outcome, what I wanted. Divorce, if that is what it would take. A sale of the apartment in Polanco and the proceeds placed into an irrevocable trust for the children. Therapy for the grandchildren, paid for. Supervised visits if that kept their safety intact. Limits on contact if behavior didn't change. I wrote these things down with the neatness of someone who has had to learn to organize a life in the margins. I underlined certain phrases. I told myself, out loud, that I would ask for measured justice and not revenge. When Viviana's message came again, "Are you sure? We could just come by quickly." I smiled and turned the paper over, letting the edge of the napkin press the ink. The kitchen smelled like onion and citrus from the lunch I had made for myself. The neighbor's child sang a snatch of a song on the street. Life kept making ordinary sounds around the periphery of this plan.
Before I left, I called Miranda and asked her to come to the dinner with me, not to be my muscle or to fight, but to act as witness and support. She answered with surprise, and then with the steady, practical kindness I had come to expect. "We will not let them make you small again," she said, as if she were stating a fact about the universe. Polanco is an easy shorthand for a certain kind of life. Glossy glass, valet parking, tables where people practice smiling. I had been to Polanco before for an exhibition, but I had never sat at a table like the one that awaited me when I agreed to the dinner. For the first time in many years, anticipation was not a hollow ache. It was a tool. I got in the car with my handbag and the small envelope that held my documentation. My hands did not tremble as much as they had the first time I walked into a bank by myself. I am older now. There is a steadiness that only years can grant you. The journey from Coyoacán to Polanco felt like moving through 2 countries. The air felt different, the faces different, the hum of the city changing its tune. At the corner of the avenue, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and saw a woman who looked back without needing permission. I thought of the first bull I sold and of the children learning to ask for what they needed in a voice that would not be cut off. I thought of Roberto's laugh when I showed him the first photograph of Raisa's artisanales, hung in a small article. I thought of the jacaranda and its confetti of purple, falling whether I watched or not. When the driver pulled up under the building in Polanco, I took the envelope from my bag and folded my fingers around it like a shield. The lights of the lobby were too bright, and the air smelled faintly of perfumed money. This, I told myself, is not about the shine. This is about the papers under your hand and the reason you have come to the table. I walked up the steps and felt the dress settle. My heart made a polite, steady noise, and I breathed in and out, as one does before stepping into an old scene with new information. The door opened, and for the first time in 4 years, a family that had kept me at arm's length had asked me to enter. Inside, the table was set with crystal and a tablecloth that was almost pristine. The candles were tall and the napkins folded like an exhibit.
Viviana rose and greeted me with the kind of smile you show a person you have measured and decided to include again. Damian looked older than the last time I had seen him properly. There was a deficiency in his jaw, a softness that said he had grown used to apologizing inwardly. They made room for me at the head of the table as if they were offering a peace treaty. I sat, and the chair held me with the weight of expectation. The waiter poured just enough wine for each glass to catch and shine. For a moment I felt absurd, like I had been dressed for a play I had not rehearsed for.
Then I put the envelope under my hand on the table and folded my fingers around it like a promise. This is where I leave off for now, with the table set, the wine poured, and the envelope at my palm. The lights of Polanco threw reflections across the crystal, and the air tasted faintly of citrus. I had prepared outcomes: the protection of 2 children and the restoration of a life she had rebuilt with her own hands. I press my palm flat against the envelope until the paper softens under my skin. The crystal catches the light and throws it back in fractured pieces across the tablecloth. For a moment, I let the reflected shards look like small windows, each one a different possibility. Conversation hums around me, the polite, looping talk families keep when they are arranging a future they believe will be comfortable. Bread is passed. Someone mentions a new restaurant. A laugh floats over the clink of cutlery. I let them speak for as long as decency allows. Miranda sits to my right, her hands folded, a small presence that steadies like a brace. She is not loud. She is the kind of friend who holds a plan in her pocket and hands it to you when you ask. Across from me, Viviana's perfume is the same sharp citrus it has always been, clean, expensive, practiced. Damian keeps glancing down at his napkin as if the crease might contain an answer. The grandchildren are not here. I ask they not be. The room feels like a stage built to convince you the past can be ironed flat. I wait until the first course is passed, until the little silence settles like dust on the table. Then I slide the envelope forward, and when my fingers leave it, the table seems to take a breath. I brought this, I say. My voice is softer than I feel, but steady. Some papers, some recordings. I do not brandish them. I set them like a thing that demands attention because it has weight, not because I wish to scare them. The waiter glances as if to ask whether this is a private matter. It is private in the worst way, private because it is about family, but it is not a secret anymore. Viviana's smile thins. Hortensia, she begins, the polite syllable failing to tether the sentence. Let me show them, I say, please. I look at Damian. He meets my eyes for the first time properly, and there is a flash of sorrow that looks almost like recognition. Arturo recovered some messages and some transfers. Fermin looked through everything. I asked them to make a timeline so it would be clear. This isn't about shaming anyone in public. This is about choices, and what you did when you thought no one was watching.
Arturo's work sits inside folders, photocopies with the corners slightly dog-eared, a page with a timeline in a tidy, lawyerly hand, and a small USB with an innocent black plastic case. I place the USB on the table and slide it toward Viviana, as if offering a choice. This is short, I tell her. Listen to 10 seconds. If you want, we can watch more later, but 10 seconds is all you need. She leans forward, curiosity prickling at the edges of her composure. She is polite, but her hands are too still. Damian's jaw tightens. I press play on my phone and hold it discreetly so that the sound is private, a small, concentrated thing. The voice on the recording is Viviana's, clear, practical, the cadence of someone explaining logistics. So the deed goes in his name for a minute, the voice says. We close the transfer, we move the money to the holding. Don't worry, it's clean on this end. We'll handle the signatures. They won't see it coming. There is a pause, a sound of someone tapping a pen. Make sure you keep Mama busy for a weekend. Take her to that gallery. It will look like charity. Around us, the silverware seems to sigh. Viviana's hand has gone pale at the knuckles. Damian looks as if he has been hit in the stomach. The waiter forgets how to walk and stands a little straighter. When the recording ends, there is a space of what I can only call moral vertigo. The things you love live in familiar corners, an old sofa, a photo frame, and when those corners shift, the center of your world rearranges. For a heartbeat, I see Roberto's face, how he would frown at a crooked frame and write it with a patient hand. Then I bring my attention back to the table. This is not about retribution for him. It is about what we owe Lucia and Emilia. Viviana reaches for a napkin. Hortensia, that, she starts, and then stops. Her mouth tightens into a line I have seen many times, the politeness that tries to stitch over an exposed seam. She looks at Damian as if to say,
do something. For a moment I see the boy who once learned to hide his tears in his mother's sleeve. He does a small, awkward clearing of his throat. "You could," he begins, but words do not have the shape he wants, the shape a confession might have. "We never meant for things to," he falters. "No," I say. "I know you didn't mean to start with a plan of malice. I don't think Damian woke up one day and chose to be cruel. People bend under pressure. People make choices when they feel tempted by the quick fix. But that doesn't make the consequences vanish." I push forward another sheet, one Arturo had labeled "Transfers, Redacted." The numbers are blurred. The institutions listed are real but not named. What matters is the trail, a sequence of payments, small at first, then a larger one after an apparent sale processed under hurry.
Next to the transfers, I have a copy of the deed that was presented to me with a different signature, and beneath that, a comparison Fermin asked an expert to make. The handwriting does not match. The notary's stamp is there, but the ink is off, the angles slightly different. Small details that a household mind might miss add up to an ugly pattern when assembled. "I am not here to humiliate anyone," I say. "I am here because someone saw an opportunity and used it on behalf of his family in a way that left 2 children without protection. I cannot accept that." Viviana's voice is a thin thread. "You don't understand what we—" "I understand enough," I answer. "I understand that the deed to the land had my name on it. I understand Roberto's intent. I understand the children needed food and a roof, and I don't say that lightly. I see now that you thought you could secure that by moving the property and the proceeds, and then keep me out of the picture." At this, Damian looks at the floor. I think of the little boy he used to be, and it makes my ribs ache in a way that is not rooted in anger, but in that weird grief that attends to watching a person shrink. I do not want to reduce him to a caricature. He is, after all, the father of my grandchildren, and I love him despite what has been done. "We have choices," I say. "We can make this public, we can go to the prosecutor, or we can negotiate something that protects the children and makes sure nothing of any value to them is taken by those who misuse power." Viviana smiles thinly, as if to say she's already counted the options. "You could make a scene," she says. "Show these things to the magazine. The publicity could—" "The magazine already knows," I interrupt. I put a finger on the article that had landed on my counter. They published a valuation. They came to my gallery. They wrote about the women who make these bowls and the hands that shape them. My story is not a lever. It's a life people read and maybe understand. There is a hush. A small spoon clinks against a saucer. Damian finally looks up and meets my eyes. He seems to want me to understand something, some pressure, some debt that pulled his hands. Yet I cannot let that soften the choices made for him. The line between empathy and enabling is thin, and this night is the place where it will have to be drawn. Fermin insisted on being the one to speak about the options. He had agreed to sit at another table upstairs, a measured distance, so that he was formally separate but available. He walks in then, in a neat suit that does little to disguise the fact he has been awake all night, and he places a folder on the table. He speaks with the economy of a man who has read more contracts than he cares to admit. There are ways to secure the children's future without dragging this into a courtroom. An irrevocable trust can hold assets that are managed for the benefit of the minors.
A sale can be arranged so the money converts to something the law recognizes as for the children. Conditions on visitation and supervision can be put in place, what we call protective measures. Alternatively, you can take this to the public prosecutor, but you must know that process is slow and uncertain. Viviana's mouth opens, then closes, and I think of all the nights she likely rehearsed her answers. She had wanted control over the narrative, the furniture of the house, and perhaps even the style of grief. Now the narrative was fragile in her hands. "I don't want my children to suffer," she says finally, and there is an ache in it that feels genuine and dangerous at the same time. Dangerous because it can be used as a shield. "I can," she starts, and then she looks at Damian as if to check whether he will hold up his end of whatever bargain she is shaping. Damian takes a breath like an apology.
"I will do what she asks," he says, and the words are both a promise and an admission. He looks at me. "Mama, I don't know where to begin. I'm sorry." It is not dramatic. It is an honest syllable weighed and offered. I keep my list quiet in my mind, and then I begin to speak, one clause at a time, as if I am sashaying through a sequence of stitches that together will make a better garment than the one I inherited. "If you choose negotiation," I say, "these are my terms." I outline what I had written at home, but I do not read it like a prosecutor. I speak as someone who wants to build, not to demolish. I offer divorce, if that is what it will take for Damian to live a life unentangled in coercion, and I say that if Viviana prefers to leave, she may. I propose the apartment in Polanco be appraised independently and sold. The proceeds are to be placed into an irrevocable trust for Lucia and Emilio, managed by an independent trustee with explicit directions for education, therapy, and eventual inheritance upon majority. I insist that therapy be funded, supervised visits arranged, and that any transfers or financial instruments in Viviana's or Damian's name which came from the disputed sale be reversed insofar as possible, or included in the trust settlement. There is no theatrical flourish when I say these things. They are measured. They are practical. I do not seek to humiliate. I seek to protect. Viviana's initial response is a pause, then a laugh that is almost a sound of disbelief. "You ask for everything," she says. She says it with the shocked tone of someone who has never been asked to give up the advantages she engineered. "You ask for what you should have been protected from losing," I reply. "You ask for what children should not have to fight for." Her hands tremble around her wineglass. For a second, I think she might walk out, that she will storm in righteous indignation and call me greedy. But something in her demeanor shifts. A small surrender. The kind of surrender that is not honorable, but is practical.
She looks at Damian, and he nods, clumsy and certain enough. I have seen men nod like that before, an attempt at taking responsibility without losing the face he needs. It is not enough, but it is something. We do not sign anything at the table that night. What happens instead is an agreement in principle, with no prior ties to the family. Viviana agrees to step back from managing the funds and to accept supervised visitation until therapy and monitoring can show stability. There is a moody negotiation about what constitutes supervised, and we set parameters then and there, because children need firm edges. The waiter brings coffee. The dessert is almost forgotten. Before the plates are cleared, Viviana stands and speaks in a voice I would not have recognized a year ago, as brittle with faint remorse. I will sign the divorce papers," she says. It is a small surrender, and a large one. The room breathes. There is no applause. There is only a thin, aching relief. We leave Polanco that night in different cars. I ride with Miranda, and on the drive back to Coyoacán, the city seems a softer place. The jacaranda trees look like confetti citywide. Miranda reaches over and squeezes my hand once at a stoplight. We do not talk much. There is a kind of gravity in the silence that is not uncomfortable. Negotiations, of course, are never straightforward. Some details we settle quickly. The trustee's name, payment for therapy initiated within 30 days, supervised visits to be arranged through a certified social worker. Other things take longer. Having the apartment appraised without alerting the public requires delicate handling. Contacting the trustee and arranging an irrevocable trust requires more paperwork than any of us had anticipated. Viviana hesitates over the divorce paperwork, like a woman considering the shape of a life without certain comforts. Damian signs some forms as if his hand is not entirely his. Arturo's notes become central. He is methodical and he keeps to the facts. "You did the right thing by not making it public first," he tells me, in a voice that indicates both approval and weariness. If this had gone to the press, it would have made their defense about character and distraction rather than the evidence. We go to Fermin's office to draft the initial agreements. The lawyer is a ballast. He prepares the documents, frames the language in a way that sounds clinical and therefore less painful, and ensures the trustee has the power needed to prevent undue influence. The terms are signed in a neutral office. I sit at the table with my pen and feel the ink bind the future together. There is a peculiarly adult weight in knowing you can make things irrevocable for the sake of those who cannot yet make their own decisions. Viviana signs in a line that trembles.
Damian's hand is steadier than I expected. There is no flourish, no dramatic scattering of papers. We choose to make the settlement practical, not public theater. I never have wanted to turn the children's security into a spectacle. The important thing is that they have a financial bed that cannot be easily walked away from by opportunists. The children move back to Coyoacán in stages. Lucia comes first for sleepovers that become weekends, that become shared meals. Emilio is more cautious. He hides behind his grandfather's old coat rack and asks 1,000 small questions. We enroll them in therapy. The therapist, soft-spoken, with a notebook always ready, helps them name things they had not been able to name. Lost dinners, the dull ache of being shuffled aside, the odd shame of accepting charity from a grandmother they barely saw. Therapy is not a miracle. It is slow work. Sessions, homework about feelings, small tests of trust like shared breakfasts and one-on-one time. Damian does not return to the life he had immediately. There are consequences to taking a route that places others in harm. He takes a job with a craftsman who makes doors, and the work steadies him. He learns to show up for school pickups, to sit through therapy sessions with the children, to let his mother teach a lesson in how to sew a hem without preaching. There is embarrassment in his steps. There is a humility I had not expected. He rebuilds, not on what had been broken, but on the practice of showing up. Viviana's presence in their lives is restricted. She makes arrangements for supervised visits, and in time begins the long, clumsy work of rebuilding trust under the watchful eye of a professional. Some visits are scripted, a supervised picnic, a museum visit with a chaperone. Some are awkward, silence that sits like a wall between them. There are days when Lucia refuses to spend time. There are days when Emilio wants to show her a drawing he made. Reconciliation is not a line. It is a sequence of small moves, a puzzle that will take years. My life with the gallery deepens. The trust, once established, begins to offer a kind of quiet assurance that lets me breathe differently. With the pressures eased, I have space to think about larger things. Not revenge, but the possibility of creating a legacy that is actively generous. I make plans, not as a reaction to what happened, but as an extension of the work I have done with clay and with community. I keep Raíces open and expand the workshop curriculum. We host regular market days where older women can sell their wares, and we partner with a small training program that teaches business basics alongside craft techniques. Miranda becomes not only an architectural ally, but a partner in an expansion that makes the gallery a hub.
We turn a back room into a small classroom, and soon the place hums with the sound of hands learning to coax shape from raw earth. Doña Crescencia teaches embroidery on Tuesday mornings. The women trade stories and recipes, and more importantly, sales strategies. We formalize a small stipend system, so the artisans are paid in advance for commissions. The gallery becomes a place where dignity is priced fairly, and bargaining is replaced by respect. There comes a time when I am offered the chance to sell the gallery. The offer is the kind of thing that could make a person young again, a buyer with resources who sees not a place, but a platform, who wants to take Raíces to a new city, perhaps even abroad. Selling feels like an admission of success and a farewell to something I hold dear. We could keep the gallery and scale slowly. We could sell it and use proceeds to lock in the children's future permanently and seed a foundation for other women like me. After long discussions with Miranda and with Fermin, and after thinking about what Roberto might have wanted, about stewardship, not accumulation, I choose to sell. The sale happens in the quiet legal way of contracts and signatures. I do not trumpet the numbers. What I do say is that we use the proceeds to seed a small foundation in Coyoacán, a fund that helps older women start micro-businesses, offers business education workshops, provides microgrants to cover materials, and supports art therapy for women who are resettling their lives after loss. The foundation is a modest thing in outward shape, but a stubborn, generous one in effect. We call it, at my suggestion, Fundación Raíces, in honor of the hands that planted the idea. There is a day when I go back to San Miguel de Allende, not to reopen a gallery, but to walk the narrow street where the commercial space once smelled of dust and possibilities. I stand in the doorway and think of the clay dust our hands once made. The courtyard has a new coat of paint, and someone is hanging lanterns for a festival. I smile. The past is not erased. It is embodied in people who now have a small stage to be seen. The grandchildren grow. Lucia is at an age when she writes poems and claims an independence that sometimes worries me and sometimes delights me. Emilio is quieter, but steady, a child who builds things with care and who likes to bring me small treasures from the market to tuck into the pocket of my cardigan. They argue, as children do, about screen time and curfews and the appropriate number of empanadas per meal. They do homework on my table. They fall asleep at my house more nights than not.
Years accumulate in the gentle way that makes hair silver and hands skilled. There is a rhythm now. Market mornings, foundation meetings in the afternoons, therapy check-ins on scheduled Tuesdays. I teach a class on curating, how to write a short description for a piece that honors the maker's story without turning it into a cliché.
I sit at a desk in the gallery office and sign small checks to cover materials, and I sometimes look up to find young women watching me as if I am a map. It thrills me and humbles me to be a map for someone. I write letters, too. I write to the women who have come to Raíces seeking a second act. I write the sort of letters that tell them not how to get rich, but how to show up, how to make a bowl that tells a truth. I tell them practical things and the soft things, the value of showing up on a dirty Monday when tourists do not come, the power of holding a coffee cup in a hand and thinking, this is my work, and I will do it well. There are days when the memory of being erased edges up to the surface and surprises me with its intimacy. Sometimes I feel the old ache, a missing seat at the table in earlier years, the long months of blocked messages, the taste of meals eaten alone. But those days are smaller now. They fit like a shard into the larger mosaic of what has been built. I have rooms full of work and friends who will carry me to doctor's appointments. I have a foundation that helps women without public applause. I have grandchildren who know my voice and my hands. People sometimes ask me if I forgave Viviana. Forgiveness is not a single event. It doesn't arrive in an elegant package. There is a slow untying that happens when the most immediate hurts are contained and the wounds can finally be tended. Viviana and I have moments of civility now. She attends some family events with supervision. She sends notes on birthdays that read like practice in being human. At times, she displays remorse that seems to come from a genuine place. At other times, she slips into old patterns. Reconciliation, when it happens, is partial and cautious. The children, not the adults, decide how much they can accept. I protect them first. Damian and I find a new groove. He learns the difference between practicality and expediency. He calls sometimes just to ask how certain food should be made, or to tell a small detail about the children that used to make my chest constrict with worry, but now merely makes me proud. He finds dignity in honest labor. He and I are not restored as if the past had been erased. Rather, we are learning again how to be family without the coercive scaffolding that once held them. Years later, at a small fundraiser for the foundation, Lucia makes a short speech about her grandmother's stubbornness and her love for bowls, and the room films with laughter and a few tears. People stand with small artist-made gifts, and I watch the faces and feel an enormous gratitude. Gratitude is not the same as triumph. It is quiet, a recognition of what work and patience have yielded. I will say this plainly. The magazine was a catalyst. It did not solve everything. It did, however, open a crack. The light came in and illuminated things people preferred to ignore.
It gave me the opportunity to set boundaries and demand protection for children, and through measured legal work and the will to do what was necessary instead of what was easy, we created a secure structure for Lucia and Emilio. The victory was not in numbers or in being seen. It was in ensuring that no one could erase those children's right to future stability in the way they tried to erase me. Sometimes strangers want to know what I would tell a woman sitting in my old place, erased, blocked, standing at a kitchen table with grief like a fixed soup. I tell them what people told me in small ways when I was small, that patience is a tool, but so is action, that community matters, that learning new skills, even something as small as how to post a photo properly, can become a lifeline. I tell them the truth, that rebuilding is work and that it requires asking for help, for the presence of allies who will not let you be minimized. Do not mistake this for a blueprint. I am not suggesting that anyone can simply replicate what I did and expect the same outcome. The legal path I walked was particular to my situation. The resources I had, a lawyer, an investigator, a small saving, are things not everyone has, and I do not pretend otherwise. What I do want to say is that agency is not a privilege reserved for the young. Age is experience disguised as silver. When you are older, you know better whom to trust and how to hold a pen steady when the line that will change things is placed before you. In the quiet moments, I return to small practices that are my human remedies. I cook the mole that Dora taught me and invite neighbors. I teach a child to thread a needle.
I take the grandchildren to the market and let them choose ingredients for the dinner we will make together. I go to the foundation meetings and test business ideas for women, how to price a hand-woven scarf, how to make a small catalog. I sleep with the small satisfaction of someone who has earned her nights. There are nights when I think of all the women who once asked me how a woman in her 60s makes a gallery from nothing. I want to tell them this plainly: you make it by doing 1,000 small things well, and by refusing to treat the repair work as less noble than the landmark moments. You show up on rain days. You keep receipts. You learn enough about contracts to know when you need a lawyer. You gather allies, people who will stand with you in the quiet. You remember that dignity is not synonymous with wealth. It is the quality of how you stand in your life. The foundation grows. It funds microloans for women who are at an age when society tells them they should be invisible. We train them on how to take good photographs, how to write a short story for a product, how to mark a price that will allow a family to eat. We place small grants in the hands of women who have always made beauty with little. We buy their materials, pay them up front, and teach them to think like a vendor.
It is not a panacea, but it changes lives in increments. A small electricity bill paid, a stock of materials bought in bulk, a young apprentice paid fairly. One day, some years after the dinner in Polanco, I walk into a small schoolyard and see Lucia speaking with a teacher about scholarship options. She is articulate and fierce in the discourse of young people who have learned to claim space. Emilio has a bicycle and brings me a dented tin of sweets, eyes sparkling. Damian stands a little straighter. He carries a toolbox like someone who knows an honest hourly wage. These details are small, domestic things, but their aggregation is the real measure of what was saved. People sometimes ask, am I happy? Happiness is not a permanent state like weather. It is a season that arrives and departs. There are moments of joy, grandchildren falling asleep against my shoulder, a successful workshop, a letter from a woman who tells me she started a business because she saw my story. There are also moments of sorrow, old betrayals that still prick like an unfinished seam. But the shape of my life now is steadier. I have space for a soft contentment that sits in the chest like a warmed stone. I think of Roberto often. I think of his quiet integrity and his fondness for a cup of coffee on the patio in the morning. I think of the way he would have complained at my insistence on selling the gallery someday. I sometimes imagine him standing in the doorway of Raisa's, head cocked, a small smile. I make peace in my mind with the ways things unfolded. Not everything turned out as he might have wanted, but perhaps he would have seen how the small acts of community he valued took on a life of their own. If you have listened this far, you have heard the arc of a life that bent, and then, by small and steady effort, straightened. I do not tell this story because I want to boast about a valuation or a magazine page. I tell it because there are women who need a map of what measured justice can look like, and because sometimes the best legacy is not the one you leave in a bank account, but the one you leave in the dignity of others. So, what have I learned? That evidence matters, that patience and strategy can be a form of courage, that loving your family does not mean you condone harm, that age is not a limitation but an asset, that artists and mothers and grandmothers can be entrepreneurs, not by chasing money, but by building systems of respect, and that finally, when the noise of betrayal fades, what remains worth keeping is not a headline, but a life with places at the table that are safe for children. If this story touched you, tell me, do you know a Hortensia? Share her story below. If you want more stories like this, women who rebuilt, small victories, and the legal human work behind them, subscribe and stay with us. Share this with someone who needs to hear that being erased does not mean you must remain invisible.